At 8:15 p.m. on Thanksgiving, my father raised his glass and ended my future. He announced the sale of Monarch Senior Living, an $80 million deal. "You get nothing," he declared. My brother cheered. My sister wailed. I remained perfectly still. For 20 years, he had called my ideals naive, my compassion a weakness. He saw a simple nurse blind to business. What he didn't know is that the buyer this powerful firm he admired so much answered to my system. He was celebrating his $80 million escape. He had no idea he was walking directly into my cage. The air in our family's Scottsdale resort was supposed to be warm, scented with sagebrush and imported jasmine. But inside the private dining room, it was glacial. The chill radiated from the center of the massive oak table where my father Edward Monarch held court. I was 45 years old, and after all these years, I was still seated at the far edge of the table, a satellite to their blazing sun. The geography of our family dinners had always been a map of my father's approval, and I was perpetually in the forgotten territories. Dahlia, my younger sister, was documenting the entire performative affair for her followers, her phone held at a flattering angle. My brother Philip was laughing too loudly at one of my father's tired jokes, his eyes gleaming with the avarice of a born heir. My mother was a beautiful silent ghost, ensuring everyone's glass was full, her own included. It was our traditional Thanksgiving ritual. We would go around the table and state what we were grateful for, a competition of blessings that always felt more like a shareholder report. Philip was grateful for a record year of cost-cutting. Dahlia was grateful for a new brand partnership. My mother was grateful for family, her words having the hollow ring of a line read from a script. When it was my turn, the table fell into a polite, impatient silence. I raised my glass. I am grateful for the clarity that comes from being underestimated. A few confused glances were exchanged before my father cleared his throat, ready to reclaim the spotlight. The main event had arrived. A sharp tap of his knife against his crystal glass silenced the room. "I have an announcement," he began. His voice boomed with the authority he always carried, the sound of legacy and old money. "As you all know, I have dedicated my life to building Monarch Senior Living, but the time for a new chapter is upon us." He paused for dramatic effect, savoring the moment. "I have decided to sell the company." The news hit the table like a shockwave. Dahlia gasped her phone, nearly slipping from her manicured fingers. Philip's face, however, broke into a slow, triumphant smile. He clearly knew. This was his victory lap. "But what about our birthright?" Dahlia cried out, the perfect tear tracing a path down her cheek for the camera. My father held up a hand. "The deal is for $80 million. The proceeds will be used to fund a charitable foundation in my name." And to be perfectly clear, he looked around the table, his gaze skipping right over me. "None of you will be receiving an inheritance from this sale." That was the kill shot. My sister started openly sobbing. Philip, who must have negotiated a separate golden parachute for himself, put on a show of surprise. But my father's eyes landed on me, expecting a reaction, a collapse, tears, anything. I gave him nothing. My hand rested on the stem of my wine glass. The deep red Cabernet inside was now the same temperature as the room. Cold, forgotten. I felt the familiar ache rise in my chest, the ghost of a 25-year-old nurse who had once believed in this family. But another feeling quickly extinguished it. A cold, hard certainty. My brother cheered at his secret victory. My sister wept for her lost future. And I remained silent. They thought it was shock. No, it was focus. My father's favorite word was legacy. He used it constantly in interviews and at charity galas. He spoke of the Monarch legacy of care, of dignity, of providing a golden twilight for the greatest generation. It was a beautiful narrative, expertly crafted for magazines and donor pamphlets. But I knew the truth. The real family legacy was profit packaged and sold as compassion. I watched Philip across the table now, accepting congratulations from my mother, as if he'd personally closed the $80 million deal. Philip saw our residents not as people, but as revenue streams. He was the one who pioneered our tiered care system, where the level of attention a resident received was directly tied to the thickness of their family's wallet. He saw my work as a registered nurse and later my degree in health administration as quaint a sentimental hobby. He once told me, "You can't put empathy on a balance sheet, Genevieve." He said it like he was teaching me a fundamental law of the universe. And then there was Dahlia now quietly texting under the table, probably updating her inner circle on the family drama. Her role in the company was Chief Experience Officer, a title she invented for herself. It mostly involved approving floral arrangements and planning themed parties that looked good on social media. She cared deeply about the residents' comfort as long as it was a marketable, photogenic kind of comfort. She once suggested we replace the medically certified ergonomic chairs with antique wingbacks because they fit her brand aesthetic better. This was the world I had escaped 20 years ago. My departure wasn't a quiet drift away. It was a schism, a violent break over that very word legacy. I had come to my father with a proposal. I wanted to invest in proactive wellness programs, in preventative technologies that could predict falls in hiring more skilled nurses instead of just hospitality staff. I argued that a true legacy of care meant keeping people healthier longer. He had listened with that familiar patronizing smile, then dismissed it all in a single sentence. He told me our clients aren't buying healthcare, they're buying a lifestyle. They want a country club for their final years, not a hospital. My ideas were noble, he said, but they were emotionally driven and financially impractical. He framed my passion as a flaw. That was the argument that finally severed my connection to Monarch Senior Living. I left and they told the world I was too sensitive for the harsh realities of business. They spun a story of a gentle soul who couldn't handle the pressure. They always said I was too emotional for business. They didn't know that emotion was my greatest weapon. The memory is 20 years old, but it still has the power to burn. I was 25, fresh out of my master's program, and I believed I could change the world, or at least my father's corner of it. I had spent 6 months pouring all my energy, all my training as a nurse, and all my hope into a single proposal. I called it Project Nightingale. It was the heart of everything I believed in. It wasn't just a business plan, it was a new philosophy of care. I had designed an integrated system using the latest technology of the time. Subtle sensors in the rooms to detect falls, smart pill dispensers that logged every dose, a centralized data platform that could analyze patterns and flag potential health issues before they became emergencies. It was proactive, not reactive. It was about prevention, not just treatment. It was designed to give our residents not just a longer life, but a safer, healthier one. I saw it as the future, our chance to truly build a legacy of care. My father granted me 30 minutes in the main boardroom. The room was cold, paneled in dark mahogany, smelling of leather and old money. The entire executive board was there, all men in their 60s, all friends of my father. Philip sat beside him, looking bored and superior. I stood before them with my presentation, my heart pounding with nervous energy. I spoke for 22 minutes. I laid out the data, the projected health outcomes, the long-term cost savings from reduced hospitalizations. I spoke about dignity and peace of mind for the families who trusted us with their loved ones. When I finished, there was a heavy silence. My father leaned back in his massive leather chair. He didn't look at my presentation. He looked at me with a smile that was all pity and no warmth. Then he chuckled. It was a low, dismissive sound that echoed in the silent room. He told the board that his daughter was full of youthful idealism. It was charming, he said, but this was the real world. He turned his gaze on me, the smile vanishing. "Genevieve." He said, his voice slow and deliberate, as if explaining a simple concept to a child. "This is a senior living facility, not a NASA hospital. Our clients pay for luxury suites and garden parties, not for cold, heartless machines. Your ideals don't generate profit." Philip smirked. The board members shifted uncomfortably, but no one said a word. In that moment, surrounded by men who ran a healthcare company, I was the only person in the room who seemed to care about health. My father thanked me for my time and moved on to the next agenda item as if I had never spoken. That day, he didn't just kill a project. He killed the part of me that still believed he was the man he pretended to be. The boardroom from my memory faded, but the echo of my father's laughter remained a cold ghost in the warm desert air. I blinked, bringing the present back into focus. The faces around the Thanksgiving table were sharp and clear. My father was beaming, basking in the glow of his $80 million announcement. He had just crushed my past and my future in the same breath, and he looked proud of it. Philip, emboldened by the news, turned his attention to me. He swirled the brandy in his glass, the picture of smug satisfaction. "You know, Jen," he said, his voice slick with false sympathy. "This is probably for the best. Good thing you never really got your hands on the family business. You're too soft for this world. You would have run it into the ground with your feelings." His words were meant to be daggers, and 20 years ago they would have been. Now they were just data points confirming a diagnosis I had made long ago. I met his gaze and gave him a small, empty smile. Dahlia, having recovered from her initial shock, had moved on to practical concerns. "But, Daddy, what does this mean for us, for the trust fund? My followers expect a certain lifestyle. The Monarch brand is part of my identity." My father waved a dismissive hand at her as if her concerns were gnats buzzing around his head. "Your mother and I will be well taken care of," he said, "and Philip has his own arrangements. As for the rest, it's going to charity. It's about legacy, Dahlia, not lifestyles." He said the word with such self-importance as if charity were a shield that made him immune to his own selfishness. He looked at Philip with genuine pride. "This boy has a killer instinct. He knows what it takes to make the tough decisions." The sale was a masterstroke, a way to secure our family's name forever. I watched the performance, the three of them playing out their tired old roles. The arrogant king, the loyal prince, and the distressed princess. They saw my silence as weakness, my stillness as surrender. They had no idea I was simply observing. I was watching a system I knew intimately, a system full of vulnerabilities they couldn't see, a system I had spent the last 2 years mapping, analyzing, and preparing to dismantle. My father called Philip's cost-cutting a tough decision. I called it mismanagement. He called the sale a masterstroke. I called it a fire sale. He thought he was a king securing his legacy. In reality, he was a captain scuttling his own ship, completely unaware that I already owned the salvage rights. Soft, maybe, but they were about to learn what a person with nothing left to lose is capable of. The Thanksgiving dinner ended not with a bang, but with a slow, suffocating silence. One by one, my family members drifted away from the wreckage of the dining table, leaving me alone with the half-eaten pies and the dying candles. I retreated to the guest room. They always assigned me a space decorated with impersonal art and a vague sense of being temporary. It was a room for a visitor, not a daughter. An hour later, a soft knock came at the door. It was my mother. She entered the room, avoiding my eyes, and began fussing with the curtains, pulling them shut against the desert night. Her movements were brittle, anxious. She came to offer her version of comfort, a performance I had seen 1,000 times. She told me my father was under a lot of pressure. She said he didn't mean it the way it sounded. She explained that this sale was about securing the family name, as if the family name was a fragile artifact that could only be preserved by discarding one of its own. I listened patiently. I had learned long ago that arguing with my mother was like arguing with the tide. She would always recede to my father's side. She was the great peacekeeper of our family, but the peace she kept was a false one, purchased at the price of truth. "I am sorry you were hurt," she said, finally looking at me. "But he just wants what's best for the Monarch legacy." I nodded slowly. "Thank you for coming to check on me, Mom." I kept my voice even, betraying nothing. It was the only armor I had left. After she left, the house fell quiet. But then, through the floorboards, I heard the low murmur of voices from the living room directly below. I could make out my father's authoritative tone, then Philip's booming laugh. They were energized, excited. I crept to the door and listened. They were planning the foundation. They spoke of board members and press releases of galas and photo opportunities. They were already building the triumphant narrative of their benevolence, a story that would be told to the world. And I was not a part of it. My father had convened an emergency family meeting to discuss the future, and he had deliberately, pointedly excluded me. I was a ghost in my own home, listening to them design a world that had no place for me in it. I stepped back from the door and walked to the window, looking out at the dark, silent desert. Downstairs, my father, my brother, and my sister were mapping out their new legacy built on a foundation of $80 million. Upstairs, alone in my room, I was the architect of something else entirely. They were discussing the future. I was activating it. The next morning, I tried to make myself invisible. I took my coffee out to the patio, hoping the vastness of the desert would offer some peace. But the peace was shattered by the buzz of my phone. It was my Aunt Carol, my mother's sister, a woman who thrived on family drama. I hesitated, then answered, knowing that ignoring her would only fuel more speculation. Her voice was thick with a cloying, practiced sympathy. "Genevieve, darling, I just heard the news about the company. I am so terribly sorry. It must be such a difficult time for you." I thanked her, keeping my voice neutral. She continued, her tone dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "And Philip was just telling us last night how you've been struggling with your little consulting business out in California. Don't you worry, dear. There is no shame in things not working out. You can always come home." The words hung in the air, a perfectly executed character assassination disguised as concern. It was Philip's handiwork, I knew it instantly. It wasn't enough for him to win. He needed me to be seen as the definitive loser, the cautionary tale. He was painting a picture for the entire extended family, the brilliant son securing the family fortune, while the failed daughter struggled with her little hobby. He was salting the wound, making sure everyone knew I had no safety net, no success of my own to fall back on. I ended the call politely, my hand gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. An hour later, a text came in from a cousin. "Thinking of you. Heard things are tough. Let me know if you need anything." The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot flush spreading across my chest. This was his move, a public shaming campaign. He wanted me to feel small, to feel the sting of their collective pity. He wanted me to be ashamed. But shame was a luxury I could no longer afford. He thought he was attacking me with whispers and rumors, a petty, pathetic little weapon to bring to a war. He had no idea the arsenal I had waiting. The evidence I held wasn't just about business failure or financial struggle. The shame it contained was not just public, it was permanent. I spent the rest of the day in a state of controlled quiet, avoiding the main living areas where my family celebrated their phantom victory. Late that afternoon, I was heading toward the library, seeking refuge in the one room in the house where silence was a rule, not an exception. The door to my father's study was ajar, a rare breach of protocol. As I passed, I heard voices from within, sharp and strained. It was Philip and my father. I stopped, hidden from view by the curve of the hallway. Philip's voice was a low, panicked whine stripped of its earlier arrogance. "$80 million is an insult, Dad. We were valued at $120 just a few years ago. This is a fire sale." My father's reply was heavy, worn down to the bone. "That valuation was based on a lie, and you know it. We're lucky to get 80. We're lucky they didn't look too closely at the books." I held my breath, every nerve in my body suddenly on high alert. "What are you talking about?" Philip blustered. "Our profits are solid." "Profits!" My father shot back, his voice rising. "You call that profit? You've cut staffing to skeletal levels. You've ignored safety protocols. Philip, one more lawsuit like the Henderson case and we wouldn't be selling the company. We'd be liquidating it to pay the damages. Your mismanagement has bled this company dry from the inside out." The Henderson case. I remembered it from my industry research. An elderly resident had a fall that could have been prevented, leading to a quiet seven-figure settlement that was never made public. Philip was quiet for a moment. Then defensively he said I did what I had to do to keep us afloat. My father let out a harsh, bitter laugh. "This wasn't a masterstroke, Philip. This was an escape. We got out just in time before the whole rotten structure came crashing down around us." I backed away from the door, my heart pounding a slow, steady rhythm in my ears. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place with horrifying clarity. This wasn't about securing a legacy. It wasn't about charity or a bold new chapter. It was about running from the consequences of their own greed and incompetence. They had taken the company my grandfather built, a company meant to provide care, and Philip had turned it into a hollowed-out shell, prioritizing profit over the very people they were sworn to protect. The last remnants of my childhood grief vanished in that moment, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. My plan was no longer just about reclaiming my own stolen honor. It was about justice. It was about protecting the hundreds of residents whose safety had been compromised for the sake of a balance sheet. My father thought he was escaping a disaster. He had no idea he was running directly into a reckoning. I walked back to my room, the sound of my father's lies echoing in my head. The plush runner in the hallway muffled my footsteps. Gilded frames holding photographs of our smiling, perfect family lined the walls, a gallery of deceptions. Each picture was a testament to the story they told the world, a story that had just been exposed as a complete and utter fraud. By the time I reached my door, the last flicker of grief had been extinguished, replaced by a cold, clear sense of purpose. This room, once a symbol of my exclusion, now felt like a fortress, a command center hidden deep within enemy territory. I closed the door, the click of the latch sounding unnaturally loud in the silent house. There were no tears. My capacity for crying over this family had been exhausted years ago. There was only action. I sat at the small desk and opened my laptop. Its quiet hum filled the room as the screen cast a stark glow on my face. My fingers moved with practiced efficiency, navigating through layers of security. Multi-factor authentication. A biometric scan. This was the digital gateway to the empire I had built, Helios Health Systems. An empire built on the very principles my father had mocked. I opened a secure encrypted messaging channel. The recipient was Ben Carter, my COO, my most trusted partner since the earliest days. He was the one who helped me turn my vision into a $400 million reality. He knew the entire history. He knew what this moment meant. My message was brief, stripped of all emotion, a sequence of commands that would set in motion the final act of a 2-year strategic play. Deploy Nightingale Protocol across all target assets. Greenlight acquisition finalization for 0900 tomorrow. No further delays. I hit send. There was no confirmation pop-up, no flashy animation. The message simply vanished into the ether, a silent, irreversible command rocketing toward the team I had built. The team that was about to change everything. I leaned back in my chair, the tension I didn't even realize I was holding finally releasing from my shoulders. It was done. The dominoes, so carefully arranged over months and years, had been tipped. There was no going back now. Through the window, the desert was dark and impassive. Downstairs, my family was still playing their game, fighting over the scraps of a crumbling castle. They just didn't realize I was the one who had already bought the entire kingdom. I slept for 3 hours, a deep and dreamless sleep. When I woke, the first light of morning was spilling over the mountains, painting the desert in soft shades of gold and rose. The storm was coming, but for now there was a profound calm. I rose and began to prepare not as Genevieve the Forgotten Daughter, but as GM Ray, the founder and CEO of Helios Health Systems. I bypassed the casual clothes I had packed and instead chose my armor. A tailored Armani suit in a deep charcoal gray. A simple silk blouse the color of steel. My hair, usually left to its own devices, was pulled back into a severe, elegant chignon. It was a look of quiet, indisputable power. A look my family had never seen on me. When I came downstairs, the mood was different. The raw emotion of last night had evaporated, replaced by a sense of weary finality. My father sat at the head of the breakfast table, looking exhausted but resolute. Philip was on his phone, already barking orders at some unfortunate subordinate. Dahlia was scrolling through social media, her face a mask of detached boredom. I poured myself a cup of black coffee and took a seat, my presence creating a subtle ripple in their self-contained worlds. They looked up, a flicker of surprise in their eyes at my transformation, but said nothing. My father cleared his throat and made his announcement. He informed us that a final video conference with the CEO of the purchasing firm was scheduled for 9 o'clock sharp. He said it was a formality, a final handshake to close the deal. He spoke with a sense of gravity of a king abdicating his throne with dignity. He was performing his final act as the great patriarch of Monarch Senior Living. I spoke into the silence. I would like to be on that call. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. 3 pairs of eyes swiveled to face me. Philip looked annoyed, as if I had interrupted an important ritual. Dahlia just looked confused. My father studied me for a long moment, a strange expression on his face. He probably saw my request as a morbid curiosity, a daughter wanting to see the face of the man who had bought her birthright. He saw it as weakness. Finally, he gave a curt nod. "Fine," he said. "Be in my study at 5 minutes to 9." He thought he was granting a small, meaningless indulgence, a final act of paternal condescension. He thought I wanted to watch the end of the story. He had no idea I was the author. They thought I wanted to see the face of the man who ended their dynasty. They were wrong. I wanted them to see the face of the woman who was about to begin a new one. At 5 minutes to 9, we gathered in my father's study. The room was his sanctuary, the heart of his power lined with leather-bound books he never read, and awards that testified to a success I now knew was hollow. A large monitor had been set up on a credenza, its blank screen, a dark mirror reflecting our tense faces. My father took his place behind his massive mahogany desk, the king on his throne. Philip stood at his right shoulder, the loyal prince. Dahlia sat in one of the visitors' chairs, scrolling disinterestedly through her phone. I chose to stand near the back of the room, an observer. My presence was an anomaly, an afterthought they had already forgotten. The clock on the wall ticked with agonizing slowness. My father cleared his throat, adjusting his tie. Philip rocked back and forth on his heels, a smirk playing on his lips. He was savoring this moment, the final confirmation of his ascent. At precisely 9 o'clock, a soft chime announced the incoming call. My father clicked the mouse, his movements grand and ceremonial, except he commanded the screen. The monitor flickered to life. For a second, it was a blur of pixels, and then the image resolved. The room went absolutely still. The face on the screen was mine. But it wasn't the me they knew. This was G.M. Ray. My hair was styled, my makeup was subtle but flawless. I was wearing a headset seated in a sleek minimalist office. Over my shoulder, displayed on a frosted glass wall, was a corporate logo they didn't recognize. A stylized sun with the words Helios Health Systems etched beneath it. I looked into the camera, my gaze meeting theirs through the screen. My father stared, his mouth slightly agape, the color draining from his face. Philip's smirk dissolved into a mask of pure, uncomprehending shock. Dahlia finally looked up from her phone, her eyes wide. "Good morning, Edward," I said. My voice was calm, clear, and broadcast through the study's speakers. It was the voice of a CEO, not a daughter. "I am G.M. Ray, founder of Helios Health Systems, and last week we finalized our acquisition of the investment firm that was scheduled to purchase Monarch Senior Living." I let the words hang in the air, a declaration of war delivered from 1,000 miles away. The silence that followed was not empty. It was heavy, suffocating, filled with the sound of a world breaking apart. The frozen tableau in the study shattered. Philip was the first to move, to react. A strangled sound escaped his throat, and his face became a blotchy, furious red. His voice, when it finally came, was a choked roar. "This is illegal!" he yelled, his finger jabbing at the screen as if he could physically touch me. "You can't do this! This is corporate espionage! Dad, we will sue her into the ground. We'll take everything." He paced the room like a caged animal, his panic and rage fueling a torrent of threats. He spoke of injunctions and hostile takeovers of lawyers and courtrooms. My father watched him, a dawning horror in his eyes, finally seeing the entitled, cornered man his son had become. Dahlia had shrunk into her chair, looking between the screen and her brother, as if watching a tennis match she didn't understand. I let him finish. I waited until his tirade ran out of steam, until he was left panting slightly, his eyes wild. Through the screen, I held his gaze. "Sue me," I asked, my voice cutting cleanly through the tension. "On what grounds exactly? The $500,000 you embezzled through fraudulent insurance claims." The words dropped into the silence like stones into a deep well. Philip froze mid-step. I continued, my tone flat and factual, the voice of an auditor, not a sister. "I have the emails you sent to the accounting department authorizing the payments to ghost vendors. I have the system logs showing the invoices were falsified from your office terminal on days when you were the only executive in the building. I know everything, Philip." The color drained from his face, leaving it a sickly, waxy white. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked like a man who had just seen the ghost of every bad decision he had ever made. He stumbled back a step, bumping into the edge of my father's desk. All the fight, all the blustering arrogance evaporated in an instant. For the first time in his life, my arrogant, boisterous brother had absolutely nothing to say. With Philip neutralized, a dead silence descended upon the study. He had slumped into a chair, a man hollowed out. My father, who had watched his son's destruction without a word, slowly rose to his feet. The shock had worn off, replaced by a deep, simmering rage. His face was a thundercloud. "So this is it," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "A hostile takeover, an elaborate 20-year revenge plot. You built a company just to destroy the one I built." His accusation hung in the air, a desperate attempt to frame me as the villain, the unnatural daughter who had turned on her own family. I met his gaze through the screen. "No, Dad," I said, my voice steady. "This is not destruction, this is a rescue." I shared my screen. The family photos and leather-bound books in his study were replaced by the cold, hard glare of a data presentation. 2 charts appeared side by side. "On the left," I said, "is the operational data from all 12 Monarch senior living facilities over the past year." The heading was Stark Monarch Legacy Performance. Below it were the numbers I knew would horrify him. 214 critical fall incidents, over 1,200 medication errors, and at the bottom, a resident family satisfaction rating of 62%. "This is the real price of Philip's cost-cutting," I said softly. "This is the legacy you were about to sell." My father stared at the numbers, his jaw tight. He had probably seen reports like this, but had chosen to ignore them to believe the sanitized versions Philip fed him. "And on the right," I continued, my voice wavering just slightly, "is the data from a single independent facility in Ohio. Helios has been secretly funding it for the last 12 months, using it as a pilot program." The heading read, "Nightingale Performance." The numbers told a different story. 3 fall incidents, 12 medication errors, a family satisfaction rating of 98%. I zoomed in on the name of the program. He would have recognized it instantly. The ghost of a proposal made by a 25-year-old girl in this very room. The numbers didn't lie, and they were telling a story my father had refused to hear for 20 years. A story of failure, of neglect, and of a better way he had once laughed out of the room. My father stared at the screen, at the name Nightingale glowing in stark white against the blue of the chart. The blood drained from his face as 20 years of history crashed down upon him in a single undeniable moment. He understood. I could see the precise instant the truth landed the moment he realized this was not just about business, not just about money, but about a philosophical war he had lost before it even began. He sank back into his chair, the sheer force of his arrogance finally giving way. The titan of industry was gone. In his place was just an old man confronted with the monumental scale of his own failure. I spoke into the profound silence, my voice no longer that of a CEO, but of the daughter he had dismissed so long ago. "Do you know why the insurance companies were so eager for Monarch to be sold? Dad, do you know why they partnered exclusively with Helios, effectively forcing your hand?" He didn't answer. He couldn't. "Because the Nightingale system doesn't just improve lives," I told him. "It saves them tens of millions of dollars a year in hospitalization costs and liability claims. It's the gold standard of the industry now. The very ideal you called unprofitable 20 years ago is now the most profitable model in modern healthcare." I leaned closer to the camera, my voice dropping to just above a whisper, ensuring every word landed with the weight it deserved. "I didn't buy your company with money, Dad. I bought it with the very compassion you threw away." And with that, the war was over. I had come home for Thanksgiving not to seek his approval, but to render it irrelevant. The validation I had once craved from him, I had finally painstakingly given to myself. The legacy of Monarch senior living, with its hollow promises and hidden decay, was dead. The legacy of Nightingale, built on a foundation of empathy and innovation, was just beginning. I ended the video call. The screen went black, plunging the study into a sudden heavy silence. The only sound was the faint hum of the computer, a machine indifferent to the human wreckage it had just broadcast. For a long moment, no one moved. It was a photograph of a family's final moment, captured in the second after the explosion. My father remained in his chair, a statue carved from regret. He didn't look at me or at the blank screen. He stared at his hands resting on the polished mahogany of his desk as if they were foreign objects he no longer knew how to command. The power had been cut. The king was a man in an empty room. My mother was the first to make a sound. It was a small broken sob, the kind a person makes when they are mourning something so large they don't even know where to begin. She looked at my father, then at me, her eyes filled with a dawning comprehension of the decades of peace she had purchased with her silence. The cost she now realized had been her own daughter. Philip was next. He pushed himself to his feet, his movements clumsy and uncoordinated. All the blustering energy was gone, replaced by the frantic, hunted look of an animal caught in a trap. He didn't say a word. He didn't look at anyone. He just turned and walked quickly out of the study, a man not just leaving a room, but fleeing a life that had just been declared a fraud. Only Dahlia remained. She looked from my father's stony profile to Philip's retreating back, and then her gaze settled on me. The usual boredom was gone from her eyes. In its place was something new, a mixture of raw fear and a flicker of something that looked almost like awe. For the first time in her life, she was looking at her older sister and seeing a stranger, a force of nature she had never known existed. I turned and walked out of the study, leaving them to the silence and the ashes of their fallen kingdom. The house, which had always felt so imposing and powerful, now felt like a mausoleum, quiet and cold. I had planned every move, predicted every reaction, controlled every outcome. I had won, utterly and completely. But as I walked down the long, silent hallway, the feeling in my chest wasn't the sweet, sharp thrill of victory. It was the heavy, somber weight of responsibility. It was the beginning of something much more difficult. The press release went out at 9:30 a.m. By 9:35, my phone lit up with notifications from every major financial news outlet. My COO, Ben, sent a text that simply said, "The earthquake has begun." He was right. He was fielding calls from stunned analysts and rival CEOs. The news that Monarch Senior Living, a pillar of the old guard, had been acquired not by a competitor, but by a disruptive tech firm sent a shockwave through the industry. The fact that the firm was run by the founder's forgotten daughter was a detail that would leak later, adding a layer of Shakespearean drama to the business headlines. But the most significant tremor happened not on Wall Street, but in the quiet, sun-drenched living room of the Scottsdale resort. I was in my room preparing to leave when I heard their voices from downstairs. It wasn't a shout. It was something far more devastating, a quiet conversation. My mother was speaking, and for the first time in my life, her voice was not soft and placating. It was clear and sharp like a piece of glass. "I watched you break her, Edward," she said. "I stood by and I watched you do it. In the boardroom, at every holiday dinner, with every dismissive comment. I told myself I was keeping the peace. I told myself I was being a supportive wife." There was a long pause. I could picture my father silenced by this unprecedented rebellion. "But I was a coward," my mother continued, her voice trembling but unbroken. "I was so afraid of disrupting your world that I let you shatter hers. I failed her. As a mother, I failed, and I will not spend the rest of my life living with that failure in silence." I stood by my door, my hand on the handle, and listened to the sound of my family's foundations finally cracking. The walls my father had built, the ones my mother had so carefully decorated, were crumbling. It was a painful, ugly sound, but for the first time I wondered if something true could be built from the ruins. 6 months had passed. 6 months since the Thanksgiving that leveled my family and redefined my life. I stood in the sun-drenched lobby of what was once the flagship Monarch Senior Living facility in Phoenix. Now it was the first official Nightingale Center. The transformation was absolute. The dark, heavy furniture and imposing oil paintings were gone. In their place were open spaces, walls painted a soft, calming green, and large windows that let the desert light pour in. Live plants breathed life into every corner. There was a quiet hum in the air, not of silence, but of calm, purposeful activity. I was here for a final inspection before the grand reopening. As I walked the halls, I noted the changes, both large and small. The technology was seamlessly integrated, designed to be helpful, not intrusive. unobtrusive sensors in the walls to monitor for falls, bedside tablets that allowed residents to video call their families or adjust the room's lighting with a simple touch. It was everything I had dreamed of 20 years ago made real. Later that afternoon, I gathered the new and returning staff in the communal dining hall. These were nurses, caregivers, and administrators, some who had weathered the old regime, others who were drawn by the promise of our new mission. I stood before them not as the vengeful daughter from the headlines, but as their new leader. I told them that the old model of care was over. Our success would no longer be measured by profit margins or occupancy rates. I explained that our primary metric was well-being. Our goal was not to manage decline, but to foster health. I told them that the Nightingale system was designed to empower them, to give them the data and the tools they needed to provide proactive, truly personalized care. I promised them that here, their compassion was not a weakness, but our greatest asset. I looked out at their faces and I saw hope. I saw the relief of dedicated professionals who were finally being given permission to do the job they had always wanted to do. As I finished, a veteran nurse who had been with Monarch for over a decade approached me. She had tears in her eyes. "I never thought I'd see a day like this," she said. Walking out of the building that evening, I felt a sense of profound satisfaction that went far beyond winning a corporate battle. This was more than just a renovation. It wasn't just about upgrading a building. It was about upgrading human dignity. The months that followed were an exercise in careful reconstruction, not of a business, but of a family. The lines of communication, once thick with unspoken resentments, were slowly being redrawn. My conversations with my mother were different now. She no longer called to fill the silence with trivialities. Instead, she asked real questions. She wanted to know about Helios, about my life in California, about the person I had become when she wasn't looking. During one call, she told me she had started volunteering at a local women's shelter, helping women get back on their feet and start their own businesses. It was her way of atoning her way of becoming the advocate she never was for me. The most difficult conversation was with Philip. I met him at a quiet coffee shop halfway between the resort and the city. He looked smaller, diminished, without the armor of his executive title. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a sullen, weary defensiveness. I didn't waste time on small talk. I slid a folder across the table toward him. Inside were 2 documents. The first was a detailed accounting of the $500,000 he had embezzled. The second was a job offer. I explained the choice to him. It was simple. He could accept a position as a regional logistics coordinator for the new Nightingale centers. It was a real job with real responsibilities, far from any financial controls. His salary would be garnished to repay every cent he had stolen, a process that would take him nearly 10 years. Or I told him he could decline the offer and I would hand the first document over to the district attorney's office that afternoon. He stared at the papers for a long time. I saw a flicker of the old monarch pride, the indignation of a prince being offered a commoner's job, but I also saw the cold, hard reality in his eyes. He had no other moves to make. He took the job. It wasn't forgiveness. It was accountability. It was the only way forward. With my father, the conversations were sparse and formal. We spoke once a week strictly about the business transition, but a subtle shift was happening. He started asking my opinion, and he actually listened to the answers. We were establishing new boundaries, new rules of engagement. We were learning to speak a new language, one based on mutual respect rather than familial obligation. I knew the wounds were deep, and many would never fully heal. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting what had happened. It meant actively choosing to build a different future, one conversation, one difficult decision at a time. A year had passed, and Thanksgiving was here again. This time, I wasn't at a sterile resort, but in the vibrant communal hall of the flagship Nightingale Center. The air was filled not with tension, but with the warm, comforting scent of roasting turkey and cinnamon. Laughter echoed from a corner where a resident was teaching his grandson how to play chess. Across the room, a woman with bright, alert eyes was on a video call with her daughter, her face lit up with joy as she watched her great-grandchild take its first steps on the screen. This was the world I had fought for. This was the legacy I had built from the ashes of my father's ambition. My mother was here today volunteering. She moved through the room with a genuine warmth I hadn't seen in her for years, a woman who had found her own purpose. Even Dahlia had shown up, and to my surprise, she was spending her time not taking selfies, but actually listening to the residents' stories, a flicker of real connection in her eyes. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, expecting a message from my office, but the name on the screen made me pause. It was from my father. We had been speaking slowly rebuilding, but he had never initiated a text before. The message was short, just a single sentence. Your grandfather would have been proud of Nightingale. I read the words once, then twice. A decade ago, a message like that would have been everything to me. It would have been the validation I had spent my entire life chasing. But now, standing here surrounded by the tangible proof of my vision, I felt something different. I smiled. Not because he had finally approved, but because I no longer needed him to. I had finally learned to approve of myself. The true legacy wasn't the company I had won, but the purpose I had found. My journey taught me that real success isn't about proving others wrong, but about having the courage to prove your own values right even when you're standing alone. It's a lesson that took me 20 years to learn through pain isolation and ultimately reconciliation. But it's a truth that now guides everything I do. Have you ever had to fight for what you believe in your own family or your career? Have you ever felt like your voice wasn't being heard? Share your story in the comments below. I read every one of them. If this journey resonated with you, please like this video, subscribe for more stories, and share it with someone who might need to hear that their ideals are worth fighting for. Thank you for listening. Remember, you are not alone and your voice matters.